So, I want to tell this story. It's actually my version, but I can back up almost everything I can say about the Beck family. I'm sorry that my wife's not here. She's preparing for the coming family holidays, and she's also recuperating from a bad fall. But Dan is here, and so that's good. I've got some Becks here to back me up. Before I begin, though, I'd like to establish a broad base in which to tell this story on, so it'll make a little bit more sense. When I was in high school here in Colton, I had many friends who were descendants of the Swedish colony that settled here in 1910s. And I interacted with the families, Andersons, Swansons, the Petersons, who later became, changed their name to Reynolds. I spent most of the time with the Reynolds, Palmgrens, and others. And with a name like Johnson, I just fit right in, even though my name isn't Johnson. It's actually Jensen, Jensen, but somehow it got changed in Ellis Island. I'm a next door neighbor in Denmark. So, interacting with these families, I just assumed that there's nobody here before the Swedish colony came. And then I met Sharon Beck. And when I began to interact with that family, I found out there were lots of people here before the immigration. Kind of like Christopher Columbus, when he discovered America, there were millions of people already here. And so I thought, gee, I ought to look into who was here before 1910. So I married Sharon. We've been married 56 years now, and I would do it all over again. But later in our married life, after I retired, I got into reenacting. And from 1995 to 2010, I was always portraying somebody either in the Civil War, or the Mormon Trail, or the Lewis and Clark Trail, or the Pony Express Trail. But the one I liked best was portraying a French Canadian and the Voyager Trail across Minnesota and lower Canada. And so I read everything I could regarding American history and Oregon history and now Colton history. That's enough about me, I promise. Now the story begins. A French Canadian named Etienne Lussier. Anybody know that name? Anybody heard that name before? Mm-hmm. You have, Judy.
Yeah, I interviewed Bradley.
On May 2nd, 1943, Etienne Lussier was at Champoeg. And he was part of the 102 people to vote on whether this area should become a provincial government of the English or the Americans. He was told by the Catholic priest to vote no against the Americans. But at the last minute, he stepped forward and became the deciding vote that caused us to become territory of Oregon provincial government. Quite a feat. I know this, and I promise not to do this, but if you were to go to Champoeg today, or any time in the near future, and go into the visitor center, they will show you a 15, 20-minute movie or video depicting that vote. I'm in that movie, and I portray Etienne Lussier. Look for the fellow with the red stocking cap. He's the one that steps forward when the other French Canadians were a little bit disappointed in him, but we're now Oregon Territory instead of Canada. Okay. Etienne Lussier was from Montreal, Canada. So, at the age of 19, and that's a French Canadian who traveled, is called a traveler. He goes from Montreal to Astoria, Oregon. In 1812, he's the age now of 21. And he's going there with the Pacific Fur Company to trap furs. And he helps establish the John Jacob Astor Company in Astoria. If you go there today, you'll see Fort Astoria, which was established in 1812. How did he get there? Well, he starts from Montreal, and between Montreal and Astoria, there's more water than land. So you take your canoe and you get in and you start rowing, and when you get to the end of the bay or the river or the lake, you pick up your canoe and put it over your head and walk to the next part. Put it back in and row some more. I did that. I loved it. It was great. Beautiful. So he's trapping furs down there in Astoria, and Hudson Bay Company comes in, the English, and they take over. He ends up going to Vancouver, which is now Vancouver, Washington, and works for Dr. John McLaughlin as a trapper. Dr. McLaughlin says, okay, we're going to send you down to Southern Oregon to do some trapping. So him and about 40 men go down to Southern Oregon in the Siskiyou Mountains, and they do great. They have so much furs, it's worth all the money they'll ever see. However, they get caught in a snowstorm. They lose their horses, and they can't haul all those furs out on their backs. So they dig a hole at the base of Mount Shasta, which they called Mount McLaughlin. And near starvation, they managed to make it back to Vancouver. And the next spring, they go down to recover their huge cache and find that the melting snow and the swollen rivers has ruined all of it. This stripped Etienne Lussier of everything. He had nothing left. And he went to McLaughlin and begged for supplies or money or food or anything. And McLaughlin said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you some land out there by Champoeg, and you can be a farmer. And he said, I don't want to be a farmer. That place is so remote, nothing will ever become of it. And so he went to work by himself on his own for a while, and he built his home for his family on the other side of the river there at Champoeg, inside what is now the city limits of Portland. He is the very first resident of the city of Portland, according to their history. A year later, in 1829, McLaughlin approached him again and said, hey, good land out there. And they said, we'll make you a farmer. I'll give you the seed and the equipment you need. And they said, there's 4 reasons why you should take this. One of them is that's fertile land. You've got topsoil that's 6 feet deep out there in French Prairie. And in fact, let me read to you what Dr. McLaughlin says. This is from the book Men of Champoeg by Catherine Dobbs. Rather than paraphrase it, I like to tell you what he said. Dr. McLaughlin's personal papers state that he offered to start his trapper, meaning Lussier, in wheat farming, but Lussier concluded, quote, there was too remote a prospect of this becoming a civilized country. And so he resumed hunting. And that's how he lived, by hunting. During this time, Lussier is said to have lived in a rough cabin on the east side of the river within the present city limits of Portland. This would make him the first Portland resident, but the location of his cabin is not definitely known. The next year, 1829, Dr. McLaughlin made known conditions upon which employees of the company, because he worked for Hudson Bay at the time, might take up farming, because it was against the company laws to discharge the men and leave them stranded with their Indian wives and children, lest their resentment might prove a menace. So McLaughlin was looking out for himself and for the company. Therefore, their names were to be carried as employees on the company books, but they could be allowed to settle as farmers in French Prairie. McLaughlin wanted to do this for 4 good reasons. It was the best farming land with an outlet via waterways. Butteville was not far away, and that became a shipping point for sternwheelers. That's another subject, but we were the first ones in the United States to have sternwheelers, because sidewheelers would not fit in the locks at Oregon City Falls. And number 2, the company could protect them from Indians. Even though the French Canadians were married to Indians, they still needed protection from other Indians. And he thought that having them there, they could be held hostage against hostile Indians, because they didn't think Indians would attack their own. That was number 3. And he found that the Indian women were very smart, resourceful, intelligent, of good stock. And I've seen that more often than not. Even though the Catholic priests in the area called them infidels. If you look at this war between, not a war, but this opposing sides, whether it's going to be English or American, you'll find in the back 2 religious factions were behind it. One Catholic, the other Methodist. And so, for example, if you got married under a Methodist priest, you had to be remarried under a Catholic priest, because they didn't agree. And so Lussier consented and built a farm on 80 acres. He's the first farmer listed in the state of Oregon. And he became quite prosperous. He grew tons and tons of wheat and became kind of a leader. That's why he was at the vote several years later. Lussier also built the first 3 cabins for Dr. McLaughlin in the Oregon country, south of the Columbia River. Now, the British weren't too happy about what McLaughlin was doing and helping these people get farms and selling up. And the British were afraid, hey, if they get established there, they might take over and become America or the United States. And so they told him that we're not happy with you, and McLaughlin said, fine. He retired and happily moved across the river and settled in Oregon City and became the father of Oregon. So he's one of my heroes. Now, what has this to do with the Becks? Well, some of Lussier's men, I posted up here. Chinook, Plord, Sanders, Arquette, Lafferty. Dana, do you recognize some of those names?
Yes, Arquette and Lafferty were here
You-
in Colton.
Well,
And I knew the Chinook Indians are part of the Beck history.
yes, and even more so as we get into. But let me quickly run down this girl I married 56 years ago, Sharon Beck. And through her family, I find out, yeah, we had people here long before 1910. So what I did is get a little bit called the genealogy. And it's something I consider as a hobby. But 15 years ago, we did not know much about our genealogy. So we were visiting our son in Utah, and we said, let's go to Salt Lake City and go to this giant genealogical library. And so there we go. Sharon and I were in this library. I'm looking up my ancestors, she's looking up hers. We were there about 2 days, all day long, just searching. And I'm finding all my stuff about my Danish heritage. I know who my great aunts are. She's finding nothing. Probably because there's some Indians involved. I don't know. After about a 2 day of searching and searching and searching, she just sat down on a wheeled stool, and I thought she was crying. She said she wasn't, but she was so frustrated because she couldn't find anything. On this stool, which is about that high, she slowly wheeled to her left, and on the bottom shelf there's a row of about 7 books, look just like this. And she grabbed one and it says, Catholic Church Records of the Pacific Northwest, St. Louis, Jervis, St. Paul, all those. And looked in the index, and there is all of her relatives. All of them. This book's full of her relatives. So, let's go up the list here and see what we got. Sharon Beck, we got married in 1968. Her father is Lester Beck. Lester Beck married Olga Hordichuk. Chok, if you're going to be from Russia. And if you're going to be a Hordichuk. Everybody here says Hordichuk.
That's my cousin. That's my cousin.
Yes, it's Hordichuk. And his wife, since Olga mentioned she was Russian, is Russian.
Oh, wow.
So we got lots of Russian in our family. And Lester's mom is Lucy Countryman. Another name you're probably going to recognize. Lucy Countryman married Charles Augusta Beck. That's where the name Beck comes in. Little side note on Charles Augustus Beck, he was raised by his grandfather, Matthias Beck. And we're getting back now in a few years. I'll get some dates in a minute. However, Lucy Countryman mother is Basilie Pleward. Another name some of you may have heard. Now, we didn't know this. We knew this much until we got those books. We found out Basilie, as a Pleward, is the mother of Lucy Countryman. And Basilie's mother is Marie Sophie Sanders. Marie's mother is Catherine Site Chinook. Now I want to stop right here a minute. She's considered royalty, by the way, because of the TSCTE. The curator in Champuy and I are working really close together on something. We believe we can prove that Catherine Chinook is a sister of Etienne Lussier's wife, which would make the guy I think so great, your great uncle. Yeah. So, but we haven't proved it yet, but we're really getting close to it. Basilie married a countryman. Marie Sophie married a Pleward. And Catherine married a Sanders. Here's the funny part about it. Every one of those people lived in Colton one time or another between 1870 and 1910. Anybody doubts, they can come and look. They're all listed in the census. However, in 1910, Colton wasn't Colton. It was Canyon Creek. In 1900, it was Highland. In 1890 doesn't exist. They all burned up. 1880, it was Lower Molalla. In 1870, it was Aurora Precinct.
Wow.
But they're all listed in there. And the reason I can find this is that I always go in to American Ancestry and I type in Preston Bonnie. And that's how I get the census. Either that or Gorbett. Or Dix. And then, funny thing about it is, the other day I'm looking at the Colton Precinct, and Highland Precinct is up here. And Colton goes up to Bonnie Road for a little ways and stops. Highland Precinct starts, and the very first family is Bauer. The Bauers have been here, it seems like forever. So that was kind of exciting. What else did I miss now? All these people here, they lived, listed as Canyon Creek or Highland, but they lived up Beat Creek, Old Colton, up on Hunter Road. And Sharon thinks that they're also related to people up Haskins Mill Road. Now, Judy lives on Haskins Mill Road. They used to go all the way through. If you go up there and open up the gate, go up there another mile or so, there's an old orchard you can still see there. That's the O'Connors. There's a relation there.
Where is it?
So, with that said, I'm willing to answer any questions. I don't think I forgot anything. Let me see what this says. No. If you get a chance to go to Shampooey, they're very, very cordial there. And upstairs, in one of the offices of the curator, is records of all that area. When the turn of the century at Butteville, and you've all been to Butteville, you've been to the store. That's my Uncle Josie Ryan's store. And next door was a tavern, and my grandfather was the tavern keeper. And I have a book of all the people in the French Prairie who drank there and owed money. Francis S. Matthews, one of them.
Are you starting to collect, or you want to collect?
And I tell you what, the Aurora Museum, Shampoo, they all want this book, because in there are personal remarks my grandfather made about so-and-so not paying his bill. And it's kind of interesting to go. So I'm open to questions if anybody has any questions. Yes?
When did the Becks get to Molalla, Colton area? When did the Becks get out here to Molalla and Colton?
Well, actually, I would say before the 1880s, because back in those days, there was no Lutheran cemetery, and Bonnie Cemetery, I think, just started in the late 1800s. So Highland Cemetery was where people were buried, on Beaver Creek Road, called the Clark Cemetery. You go there today, and there's the Becks, Matthias in particular, and Countryman and all those people. So I would say, it's hard to say Matthias got here, but we're thinking one of the first, because this place wasn't always populated by too many people. 1870 is the farthest back I go. So I would say 1870. Yeah.
So the Arquettes owned the old Schoberg place before the Schobergs bought it, and we bought it from them. But
I wondered where that was.
yeah, so the Arquettes owned that. It used to be 80 acres, and Judith gave me an abstract deed that has mentions of names and how their business dealings went about, and paperwork was a little more detailed back then. It had a story with it. But I was always curious, when did the Arquettes get to Colton? Do you have any?
Well, I'd have to look in here, but later, afterwards, you can come up and look. I've got the Arquettes here.
Okay.
Most of them were definitely here in 1910, but I can go back. 1880, the Arquettes were here.
Okay, that's interesting.
And Colton is so full of history, you can't believe it. And David Long knows quite a bit about it, and Judy knows quite a bit about it. In fact, in the past meetings we've talked about it. But you can keep on going and going and going, and you'll find stuff. The Arquettes also, there were two brothers and a son.
Yes.
Jean, or Jean, or whatever you want to say, it's Jean, and they were considered as two Indians back in those days. So the Beck string will go back quite a ways. In fact, I don't know if I can go back any farther, because Catherine Chinook, we know, came from somewhere between Vancouver and Astoria, because that's where the Chinookans live. And so I'm saying that Catherine was born in Oregon. So this makes Sharon a sixth generation, makes Dana a seventh generation, makes my grandchildren eighth generation Oregon born. And I defy anyone today to come up with that many generations of Oregon born people.
Yeah.
So, we're snobs, we're sons native of Oregon.
Unique.
You're unique.
Yeah, very, very. Any other questions? Okay, I'll be here afterwards if anybody has any questions or wants to look in the book.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
That was great.
Yeah.